I have one.
Oh, really? Okay, on air now.
I've never actually seen that button before, but anyhow.
That's brilliant.
We're on air.
Cool. Right, so first thing we've got in here is the updated messaging regarding dates.
I guess the first thing would be welcome everybody who's watching.
Oh, sorry.
The LTS community meeting for Node.js, the 15th of May. Sorry. Okay, now take it away, Gibson.
Okay, cool. Yeah, first one is Miles's issue about not specifying exact dates in the plan for releases, just specifying the month. Made sense to me. Don't think anything needs to be said, really.
So should we just plan that?
I guess, does anyone disagree?
Nope.
Okay, so yeah, I've got to rebase it because it's out of date, but I will.
Cool.
Now, I think that there was that's for the, as I'm sort of remembering now, there was one set of dates we thought we could have a date, and other ones where it's just the month was fine, right? Like the out of service.
I think the idea was that closer to the date,
right,
we would update it with an explicit date, and it also had language. The exact date that a release stream will be moved to LTS, moved between LTS modes, or deprecated will be chosen no later than the first day of the month it is to be changed with no less than 14 days notice.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds reasonable.
Cool. Yeah, we may as well update it, and then if people have trouble, then we can iterate, because this caught us again. We should get the correct stuff out there.
Speaking of which, we don't have a
I'm making
doc. You're making it. Cool.
Right now. Just give me a second.
Okay. Right, that was easy.
That was from the last one. Okay,
Yeah.
sorry.
I've almost got it.
Okay.
Cool. That's all right. Well, the first one, there shouldn't be many notes for the first issue. So, second one was clarify what happens with odd-numbered releases in April. I.e., the question is, what do we do with maintenance releases? Basically, do we support them for the few months? This came up almost up on a year ago now, and it fizzled out. So we should probably discuss and decide.
Yeah, I think it just needs to be updated for some of the discussion. Like it was 2 months instead of, it was 2 instead of 3, right?
Yep.
And I guess there was some discussion maybe here or somewhere else about whether maintenance was the right word.
Yeah, there was some discussion in here.
So quickly, just to throw this out there, with the updated messaging, that's way out of sync with the current README. So I'm going to update that later, once we get off this meeting. And if you all could quickly sign off on it, I'll land it. Sorry for distracting.
Sounds good. So Miles, for the odd number releases one, 128.
Yeah.
Do you know if that's still accurate, like the description in the PR?
So yeah, so this was not, I think the problem with this, and this was the problem that I had with it, was it should not be called maintenance. Because maintenance mode is an explicit mode for LTS, which is not what an odd numbered release moves into.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe it's 2 months of updates.
Well, I mean, to be honest, we never even discussed there being any long-term maintenance support for an uneven release after we cut the even release. The only reason why we would actually really land anything would be if the release that we did right before severely broke something, or if there's a major security something right before. Otherwise, I don't see any reason to be continually updating it. Which is why I think they're saying it moves into maintenance mode, because that's the equivalent of the maintenance contract. But I also 3 months seems really significant for a branch that only had 6 months of life. Why would we give it 3 months of maintenance?
Well, I'm with you. My preference would be at the end of the current, that's it.
Yeah.
It just moves up.
I like to my gut is to be very ambiguous about this, and I know ambiguity is a problem, but genuinely deal with it on a case case basis. Like, if we don't have a contract about this, like, it's obvious when there's things that we should be backporting, and then we should like handle it when like things come up. Like, if there's an OpenSSL CVE that comes out the day after the release is done, obviously we're going to update it, you know. But like, I don't know. I feel like having, especially actually adding to it, the fact that like we're getting with V4 like even more wishy-washy on what maintenance means. I really don't want to be like associating these things, because all of a sudden there's 6 months of like the branch becomes 9. Like,
Yeah, no, but I guess the question is like, if we don't say anything, I think we used to say nothing, which got us into trouble, right?
I don't think this ever got us into trouble, to be honest. I can't recall. I think this was just Anna like documenting processes we were having conversations.
Yeah, except there were a few. I mean, there was definitely initially, at least, people who felt we really needed to have maintenance. Like there were some voices who were like, "Well, no, we gotta. The current should have some lifespan after." Now that conversation may have moved on, and it may not be important to anybody anymore. But like even the scheduled graphic shows those on there.
I can see wanting a little bit of overlap. We're talking about overlap here. Like, like the day 8.x comes out, what does that mean for 7.x? Is it just like, whoa, if you're still running it in production, that's your problem? Or do they have like a little bit of time where we'll help them out?
So like,
I kind of get the wishy-washy, like the why don't we just leave it unsaid? But given that we do describe current as a stable release.
I have never described current as a stable release, and the people who have been, I disagree with, and I vocally and publicly disagree with.
We changed the name from stable to current to try and avoid some of that confusion.
For that exact reason. I think people sometimes forget about how the release process on current works. Literally every commit on master that's not Semver major will be put into a current release on a weekly basis, unless there's some sort of explicit date on it. And like, we see regressions on a like non-trivial, like current exists to catch regressions before LTS. Like, that is kind of the purpose. And like, I actively advise people to avoid running it in production for the exact reason that you could be forced to upgrade. Like, it's not going to have a continued support process. Now, with that being said, it doesn't mean that you can't, and it doesn't mean that 100% you shouldn't, depending on what you're running and the purpose of it. I think that it's very reasonable for us to maybe say something along the lines of like, after the new branch has been cut, there will be no planned releases. In the case of obvious major regressions and security vulnerabilities, the release team will discuss doing a release as necessary, right? Like, that is outlining basically what I'm saying. Now, there's no reason why, for example, like 8 months later, if there's some like extremely major, like mind-bending security vulnerability found on 7, that we wouldn't discuss it. I would argue at that point we're 2 releases ahead and we just shouldn't. Here's the thing too, like people who are running on 7 in general who can't upgrade to 8, and this is the reason why I don't advise running on it, is like they find themselves in this precarious situation. Like, yeah, we should patch security vulnerabilities on it, obviously in a reasonable amount of time, but they're not gonna like if you can't upgrade, you're gonna be stuck on this thing that's unsupported. So I don't know, it just leaves me with a really weird feeling as far as like making an explicit contract, especially an explicit contract that's half the length of the actual release. So like we should.
I could go with like no support at all, or I could go like we'll maintain it until the first patch release on the next one, or something like.
Patch releases happen on a weekly basis on the next one. Like, I honestly think that like deferring to the release team, it's problematic, because if someone on the release team is willing to keep doing a release on that major branch for eternity, then there's like arbitrarily it could keep running for eternity. Right?
I think that's sort of what happened in the past. So
not really. Like, I mean, when was the last V5 release? Like,
I don't mean for eternity. I just mean I think there were some people who were willing to keep them going for a little longer. in the past, but maybe not anymore, right? So
yeah. The other thing too, for what it's worth, and like we'll see this happen again with the 8 cut, like it was almost like overnight, like because this is the thing to keep in mind also, like the people who are running on 7 because they want to run on head for the most part, but they want a little bit more stability than head. Like most of those people, I would be extremely surprised if they're not updating to 8 almost immediately once that branch comes out, right? Like maybe they'll wait a month or something, but for the most part, like the people who are running on 7 will be the same people who are running on 8. Like we're not talking about people who are running an LTS branch and want to run that branch for 3 years.
Okay.
Like the only other profile that we're talking about are people who have like tagged to a release because that was like the release that was out when they started their project, and they're not working with like sophisticated release patterns, and they're for the most part not going to be upgrading anyways. Like my gut is telling me that like for the most part, like we're litigating things right now that people aren't even going to really care about, and just like all we need to do is just put some language down saying like, you know, I think explicitly like we will do a release if we deem it necessary. It's pretty reasonable.
yeah, I agree. That's, you know, maybe I think the people here, I don't hear it, and sorry, Gibson, I don't know if it, but I don't hear any objections to the just no support at the end for the people here, right? So maybe we should propose that and then see if anybody chimes into the contrary.
Yeah.
And, you know, if not, then move to that. Because I think even if you look at the discussion on the issue there, you know, I think Rod chimed in saying, well, we thought people would need this, but maybe not so much, right?
Yep.
So something that I think may even be like a bigger meta point that maybe needs to just be floated up to the CTC is like, what is the project stance and messaging on current? I think truthfully, the discussion that we're having right now is from the kernel of that. It's like, we are inconsistent as a team about like how stable current is and what people should be doing with current and how they should be relying on current. So maybe what we need to do is like punt this to the CTC, have the CTC come up with like an official stance on current that we should probably document. And based on that official stance, we should decide what our LTS process is on it. Because if Core wants to go ahead and say, you know, we're going to stand by current as this stable thing that you should be using in production without a problem, then we maybe need to like change what that support system is based on that.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd be tempted to just propose that it's, you know, there isn't going to be any, and see if there's people who still feel otherwise.
So we could do both, right? So Miles, I've kind of tried to write down what you said in the Google Docs. So afterwards, if you just put that in a comment or whatever it is you actually said in that PR, because I think that reflects the current status of current. So if you could just shove that in, like as a suggested update, and then we can also raise an issue in the CTC to discuss like changing how stable we think current is. And if it turns out it is, like it does need to be changed, we can change it later. But for now, what you said.
Well, I mean, I will fight pretty hardly that we should be more explicit about the fact that current breaks and that we knowingly break current. Like we just do. And that's kind of the point. So I'll follow up on that one. I've made a note about it.
Yeah. I think if you look at my last comment, it's almost like I suggested odd number major releases will cease to be actively updated when the subsequent even number major release is cut. Updates will be limited to critical updates for a period of 2 months.
Yeah.
So I agree with everything there except for anything mentioning arbitrary, like actual time.
The last sentence.
Yeah. So yeah, we could take. I just did maintain that, so we could just say.
Further updates will be
yeah, we could just say odd number major release will cease to be actively updated when the subsequent even number major release is cut.
Yeah.
And it's ad hoc if anything else happens. So you're basically saying nothing's guaranteed, but special case we can make the right decision.
Yeah, and I think that's fair. And then like, I mean, if people run into a wall against this, they'll let us know. You know? Yeah.
I think that's, so why don't we, if I'm gonna just cut and paste that from, and I'll paste it into the issue, right? From discussion in the LTS meeting, the suggestion is, right, I pasted that in, and then the question, I guess, is, do we want to? We can ping Anna and say, hey, do you want to update, or do you want to, you know?
Yep. And if she doesn't, someone else.
One of us can volunteer
take it.
to do that, right?
Yep. That's fine. Okay. Cool. I think that's done. So, moving on to the next issue, CDC 122. Charter the LTS working group. So, I guess it makes sense to discuss this. James said he planned to bring this up, but of course he's couldn't make it. So, does anyone know what the steps are to actually decide that we want to be a working group, or if there's any work that needs to be done?
I think the thing that then complicated is the follow-on discussion I saw was that maybe there should be one working group, which is like the LTS and release working group.
Yeah, where did that happen?
Oh yes. So that was something that I was discussing, was just like, what makes sense as far as like, I almost, okay, so I'm going to step back. I just like said 50 words without meaning anything. So there's two different things that are going on here, right? Like LTS should just be chartered anyways, like aside from all of the reshuffling that's happening. Yeah. And then there's like the proposal that James has put together on like governance structure based on the conversations that at this collab summit. So one of the things here would be, I think LTS should get chartered. I mean, it's kind of silly, the amount of like, air quotes, I'll say power. I don't really mean power. I'll say responsibility. I actually like that way better as a descriptor. We have a lot of responsibility and the ability to make decisions without really any chartering, which is pretty funny. And that was kind of like one of the cruxes, along with a few other things, about the discussion of why the governance model should maybe change, because it's not really reflecting where decisions are happening in the project. Now, whether or not LTS and release conflate into one group is another thing, because they deal with very similar problems, but they aren't exactly the same problems, right? Like release is more about like, I would argue it's like our release process, our tooling around release, which then overlaps with build. It has to do with like the decisions of the actual release process itself, which then overlaps with LTS. But LTS is more about like the actual and now you could argue it's the release process of the LTS branches and the differential between them, which in my mind would then actually make LTS a subgroup of release rather than the other way around. It's like Node TSC gives release, you know, the power to make decisions about releasing, and the release team in turn then hands over the decision making to the release on the LTS branches to the LTS team.
Yeah, whether it needs to be that, like, it could just be that, you know, you could say the CTC delegates power over all releases to the release / LTS team, and then it's organized itself, right, into subgroups that are of interest in the different areas, because I don't think we need the charter of the charter of the charter.
Oh, totally. Well, I mean, they don't all need to be chartered, right? Like, the top level needs to be chartered, and the pushback there was more like, in my gut, it feels like the top thing that should be chartered is a release working group that has an LTS team, not an LTS working group that has a release team. That feels backwards to me.
Yep.
The LTS doesn't cover the current, right?
It doesn't cover current. It doesn't necessarily cover infrastructure. It doesn't cover like signing binaries. Like there's all sorts of parts of the release process that LTS relies on that is unrelated. So LTS,
that's true.
LTS make all these decisions and like suggestions as to how like the process should apply. But to me, it's like a subset of this larger release thing. And maybe that's part of the reason why it hasn't really made sense for LTS to even really charter to begin with.
Yeah, like, I mean, in absence of the release team being chartered, it may have made sense. But at this point, I don't know if it makes sense to run off and charter it until we figure out if they should come together, right?
Yeah. I also think, like, to be honest, like, I don't think release needs to meet, like, LTS, we've pushed it off to every 3 weeks. But I do think that there would be like a lot of value in the release team, like regularly, even if it's once a month or even once every 2 months, like meeting and discussing what's working, what's not working. We have like all these hanging issues in release with like signing binaries, with our infra. Like there's a lot of stuff that like it's happening asynchronously, but there's a lot of responsibility there and a lot of things that can float through the cracks without these things being a little bit more organized. So, you know, like back to the original issue at hand. You know, this one of like chartering the LTS working group, like I think there's value in chartering it, but I do really feel like it should be a release team, a release group, and with the LTS sitting under it.
So I kind of think I don't have really strong feelings about the technical organization, but I do feel like some of the split is historical and doesn't make as much sense anymore. In particular, like I think like the way in which things are backported to 7.x, or like right now, should be the same as the way things are backported to 6.x and to 4.x. You know, if there's tags, we should use them uniformly. If things need to be backported, we should use the same backporting things. If we, you know, when we do backport, how we deal with the old commit metadata, like do we indent it or not, like that should be the same. So I think it's positive to have, I like your suggestion, Miles, of merging, having it being like a team underneath a release working group, because I think that more coordination.
I think the one thing we do have to keep in mind, though, is that
Hey, Jeremiah, thanks for joining.
Is in terms of the release team, we probably want to subset. So I could see you calling it the release working group. And then I could see you have a releasers team within that working group, which are the group of people who can actually do releases, because we constrain the privileges. And we don't want to say just because we haven't given you those privileges, you're not in the working group. And you could then have like, you might even say, well, okay, there's a releasers team, and then there's an LTS team, if that makes sense. You know, if you want to group the sort of interests that people are being most active in, and then you could call the overall thing the release team, right? I think there's just that one other wrinkle that we gotta. It's the releasers. I think probably, you know, that wasn't just expanded because it came along with the privileges and access and everything.
Yeah, the LTS team should be able to have people in it who don't have the privileges and responsibilities of cutting releases.
Exactly.
Especially like with backporting and getting people involved and stuff, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be honest, like there's nothing. I think that it's very loose as far as like people coming in and out, and like participating in a working group meeting or participating in the process does not mean that you necessarily need to either be in the team or in the working group. And I think that, you know, how we delegate all this stuff, and maybe this is part of the process of chartering, like how we delegate, like where responsibility comes from and where access comes from, I think will kind of like work itself out as we like make this process clearer. Hey, Jeremiah, is your mic working?
Yes.
Cool. When did you join? Just recently, did you catch kind of what we're talking about right now regarding chartering?
Not really.
So the really high level, to just catch you up, and I'd love to get your opinion on this, was the discussion that right now we're talking about chartering the LTS working group, and I was pushing that it may actually make more sense to charter a release working group where LTS was a team within that. With LTS kind of being a subset of our release process, but not our entire release process, it doesn't really make sense for LTS to be the top level thing. Do you have any thoughts on that?
You're probably right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if we have a release working group, we're probably, I mean, there's going to be, I feel, a limited amount of topics that a release working group will talk about in regards to current or stable.
Yeah.
So I think not very much will change, and it kind of saves us having these two groups that sort of interact and stuff.
Right. I was just thinking that you would, you could have a release working group, but then we probably still need like a sub-team, the releasers, who are the ones who have all the privileges and access to the release machines and that kind of stuff.
Well, I guess that'd be the one difference is like we currently have, yeah.
Right, like currently the release team, those are the people who have access to the release machines and whatever else, you know, the keys and all that. And that would then become a subset of the overall release work group, because the release work group would have those people plus people who are interested in LTS and people volunteering to do backporting or whatever. Like the non-release things people would also be in the work group as well.
So like kind of as like a really small thing right here is like we could have like at a top level is release, and under that is LTS, and under that could even be something like backport. You have current, you have infra, you have releasers. I mean, I don't think we need to get too pedantic about it right now, but like Jeremiah, like part of that was just the idea that the actual release working group may only meet like once a month, but it just felt backwards for LTS to be the top level thing. And there's the other thing on it too is like I think that there's a lot of different parts about release that have not been coordinated or organized right now, from our infrastructure to our tooling, our process. Like there's a lot of things in there that are either A, tribal knowledge, or B, just kind of things that the release team are picking up or the LTS are picking up, but it's not formalized. And these are things that would be clearer under a top-level release group. And I mean, it would only need to meet as much as necessary, but I do think having more formalized meeting of the general release stakeholders would help things like that not fall through the cracks and help us stay more on top of our general release process.
Right, yeah. Okay, so I think I don't know if we're gonna have if we're gonna have a chartered release working group that actually like the only reason you'd have to have it chartered is if it was actually making the decisions to make releases. But I don't think we would want, or I don't think the CTC rather would want people that are in that essentially category to make the decisions about releases that aren't collaborators on like the core project. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do, but I mean, like, I think it goes in two ways. Like the group of people who would be part of this chartered working group are the people from core who have already been given this responsibility.
But I think, you know, the point may be that the working groups generally, we haven't really said, no, you can't join a working group, I don't think.
Yes and no. I mean, like most of the working groups, like as far as I've seen, it's not like people just get to say, hey, I want to be in the working group and we add their name, like even LTS. Like,
no, true. Like build is another good example,
yep.
But as long as people show up and contribute, generally then they're added.
And I think that like with the way in which this is done, if it's done right, if releasers is a team underneath release, like people won't just be arbitrarily given, you know, the bits that allow them to do the releases. Of course, people want to come in and like focus on the release process and like have good ideas there, but aren't necessarily core contributors. I actually see that as a good thing.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Like it decouples it. Like this is different work than core.
So what we're saying is, so the CTC delegates the like release working group, here's the responsibility to do this stuff, and the release working group can say, right, here, this sub-team is like the people who actually have the focus, responsibility, whatever, to actually get this stuff done. Like, it's not that everyone in that team makes all the decisions, it's sub whatever.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of that's how build works right now already anyways, right? Like, I'm in the build working group, and I have CI privileges for certain parts of the system, but not the whole system.
Yep.
And like, there's parts of the system that are quartered off to like, you know, specific groups.
Yep.
Yeah, we have the sort of need
of the charter, right?
No, it's the if you need the access to do what you're going to be contributing, then yes. Otherwise, then least privilege is the right way to go.
Yeah, I think the only thing that we would probably need to clarify, which is important, would be that like probably the addition of any members to the releasers team would require sign off from the CTC or something like that. And I think that solves the problem that you're worried about, Jeremiah, which is and I think that's kind of what we have right now. Like, I mean, everyone who is a releaser is a collaborator because you kind of need to be anyways to like have the privileges to do the things you need to do.
Yep.
But
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be it would be like we delegate this, but in this, to add, yeah, makes sense to me.
Yep.
So it sounds like the proposal is that we would, we should take the release team and the LTS team, put them together into a releasers work group, and then have that be chartered.
yeah, and part of the chartering would be figuring out what that looks like.
Right. I think that sounds like the right way to go on this issue. We just now need more input from the people on the release team, right? Because we don't have good representation here.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think anyway, unless who else is on the release team? There's James.
Colin is on the release team, Evan's on the release team, and Italo are on the release team.
Okay.
I think those are the only people who are not in the meeting right now, but I mean, I don't think that we'd be asking for any of them to do anything differently than what they're doing right now. Yeah. And James and Rod.
Okay, so we should probably just write down a proposal and then, based on that, make sure that they're comfortable with it as well. And then we could propose the charter.
Yeah, and I guess part of the charter proposal will also be like, who are the members of that working group? And then, yeah, like the thing that will be tricky here, and Jeremiah, you're totally right, would be like figuring out what the power dynamic is and who like has the ability to make decisions and not make decisions. And like especially like the releasers hold a lot of power as far as like, or I'll fix that again. The releasers hold a lot of responsibility. There's a lot of responsibility in having those permissions. And if the release team itself, the release working group is made up of a whole bunch of people who actually have less responsibility than a team that reports to them, like that's okay and that can work, but we're going to need to be extremely explicit about the language as to how that works and why that works. Otherwise, it's going to be like confusing and ambiguous. And
I think I still like the idea that, basically it requires CTC approval to add somebody to the releasers team.
Yep.
So, Miles, is that something you could write up as we have it and then maybe put somewhere?
I'm also willing to volunteer and do that.
Okay, sure, cool.
Michael, did you just volunteer?
Yeah, I'll
Right.
volunteer to write up the
Okay,
proposal.
awesome. Now I don't have to do all the follow-up.
I'll note that Michael volunteered, yeah. Cool, all right.
And Michael, feel free to ping me if you want me to review it at all before
Sure,
you.
yeah, I'll probably write it up. You can give me your input, and then we'll paste it. Probably use the same issue, and then we'll CC the release team.
Okay,
Yeah.
sounds good to me. So last one we have here is reviewing Semver minors.
Yep. So, Miles and I went through these, or rather, Miles went through these.
It was a group effort.
Yeah, sure. So we should probably start with the HTTP one at the top, which is one of Brian's, which didn't get the right labels, or maybe that's gone in somewhere else now.
I see crypto at the top.
Sorry,
above the list.
above that. There's one that didn't show up in the backport thing because
Did it not land in a 7 release?
it was backported in a separate thing, and I think someone added "don't land" on the original.
Oh, okay. So we lost it.
Yeah. Anyway,
Add new functions. Outgoing message. This PR adds functions to allow more official public access to the current headers for an outgoing HTTP request. It allows users to avoid having access to the _. It allows users to avoid having access to the private _. Headers property directly to get the same information. That seems reasonable to me, especially if it's a pattern we're pushing people towards. As long as this has not had any regressions. The only thing, this landed in a 7.7 release, which was February. So that's, a pretty reasonable amount of time.
Yep.
Does anyone have any objections to this one landing?
So it could be good for consistency, but I'm really not sure it's necessary. Pretty much based on the fact that, like, The APIs to do this previously are so entrenched in the Node ecosystem that whether or not we do this in 6 is not going to change much. I'm not saying that's necessarily like a point not to do it. That's just background, I guess. I don't think where it is going to change much at this point. It's going to be very slow, nonetheless, moving to them.
I think the argument here for it would be that in 6 months, 4x is going to be out of maintenance, and 6x will be the only like LTS release that's older. So like a handful of these ones that are in this list are to like make the APIs of 6 and 8 more in line, which would mean that like in 6 months when 4 is gone, that like people for the most part can release code using these APIs and not have to wait like another year and a half before they'd be able to do so in the wild.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's the main push. So maybe we can just, so with that being said, do people have feelings about this aside from that?
If there's no, if we can't think of any reason not to backport it at all, I guess why not? Like if any tiny thing has gone wrong with it, then yeah, we shouldn't. But it seems like it's been okay so far.
Okay, and for the sake of testing things out, and I think that there was a request for it to be backported. So let's just check quickly. It doesn't land cleanly on 6x and will require a manual backport for 6x. So I think that for what it's worth on this one, maybe we like we tag it and then request a manual backport and may have to wait until the next minor release because this isn't something that's pressing.
Yep.
Does that seem reasonable?
Sounds good to me.
Yeah, I guess if they turned it around quickly, why not include it in the next one?
Well, the RC is supposed to be tomorrow. So
well, okay, then it may be too late.
Really quickly, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
But yeah, so from a point of view of this, we can say we're okay to have this go into 6, but there's no rush.
Okay, cool. So I've just updated the issue. I added a yes column and a manual column. We can fix this up later to make it better. But I just added that to the manual column.
Okay.
The next one that we have on the list here is support OpenSSL conf again. Sam, that's yours.
There's a backport open for this. Basically, it re-adds functionality that was there before, but it was reported as a privately that this is a security vulnerability. So this fixes that and restores the previous behavior, basically.
So does anyone have any objections? No? Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and take those 2 commits. I'll move them up to the yes category. And we can fix this afterwards to make sure that. Okay, so the next one we have here is upgrading libuv to 110.2.
Yeah, and also, well, the 110.0 is probably a bigger change, right? Because that's a minor than libuv. The third one down.
I mean, in the past, we've treated upgrading libuv at all as a semver minor in LTS, but I see no reason why we can't kind of like take it as a batch. Like part of the reason why we waited on this was to like wait for it to take in the kinks to come out. And I feel like with 110.2, which landed in January, we're kind of at that point now where it's gone long enough. Everyone's cool on this?
Yes.
Yep.
So is there someone who knows the libuv process really well and would be willing to make sure that they go through, get a backport together with the upgrade of all 3 of these, as well as any like kind of tangential commits that were around fixing libuv bugs? Is anyone comfortable enough to step up for that? Okay, I'll take it, and I'll ping Colin, who can probably help with it.
Yeah,
Guys,
those
I
three.
can do it. I mean, I'm moderately familiar with libuv. I've got a couple PRs in. What do we are we floating patches on libuv? I didn't think we were.
It's not floating patches on libuv, but like for example, I've tried to keep track of it as much as possible. But maybe it's 10.1 or 10.0. But there's like fixes that came in. Oh yeah, so here's when backported, like when 10.1 is backported, it will need to be backported with 9267 and 8645. Oh wait, that's the libuv 10.0. 8645 is the reverting of the REPL control C thing that landed in 6 and then was reverted out of 6. And now we need to add it again because it wasn't supposed to land until the libuv upgrade. So that, like, because we were floating a patch. Yeah, anyways.
That sounds like it's in your head and not in mine, so.
It's documented in the issue.
Okay.
But so that's more what I'm saying. We need to just go through and like make sure that any of the things that are referenced in those issues and any of the things that should land with it also land. I think we would be fine by the RC tomorrow to just like get in the same minor patches and the few that are documented in there, and then we should get the libuv team to review it, and we can add in a future RC any like patches that we missed. And that's like in my mind also, you know, totally a reasonable use of the RC process because those would just be fixing bugs. So is everyone on board with libuv?
Yep.
Yep.
Cool. Do you want to take the next one? The next couple, I think you know better than me. Gibson.
Sure. So the next one's where are we? Oh yeah, you missed stuff, right? MDN link for iterator. This is a WG one, isn't it? So it shouldn't need, like, this shouldn't be backported as far
Oh no,
as
it shouldn't. Okay, cool.
Yep, easy. All right. Prove man page and help.
Has don't land on v6x already, so.
Right. Oh, really? I don't know how that ended
The
up in
first
there
one.
then.
Yeah. We may have added that in the audit today.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So I guess this is just, I'm not entirely sure why this is Semver minor.
Jeremiah, you were commenting on this one in the original review. Do you remember it?
Sorry, which one?
Improve man page and help.
10157.
Oh, it's marking this as Semver minor as it documents a feature added in. So this should not be Semver minor because it documents stuff from the crypto allowed adding extra certs, which was something that we landed in a previous Semver minor.
Right.
So
is it easiest just to say
yes,
mark it as let's land it and not worry about the fact that it says it's Semver minor?
Yeah, I think that we can do that.
Just
yeah,
yes.
Even though it's not Semver minor, you just need to make sure you cut out the parts that aren't relevant to v6.
We've already backported that to v6 though. So the only thing that I'm seeing here is the trace event support. So okay, so this would be an argument maybe for not landing it, to be honest, is there's stuff in here in the man page and the help that documents stuff in the trace support, and we're gonna have to go through and manually do all this stuff. So the only thing that I think, yeah, so when it was backported to 7, it backported including stuff that relied on 6. And so we have a manual backport to 7, but I think even that will end up having to be reviewed itself. So I think we can back this out for now of dealing with it.
Yeah, it sounds like if it's not worth the work versus the gain.
Yeah.
Cool. So do we want to consider it later or just say don't bother landing?
I think that we can get away with just not bother landing it, to be honest.
Yeah, until somebody comes up and says, hey, what, unless there's a pull, that sounds totally reasonable.
So I updated those two. I removed them. The next one, this one, I'm not sure how you're all going to feel, which is node inspect. The CLI node inspect that we've added into 7 now. We've started, that's shipping with 7, correct? Or is that something that we're only landing in 8?
It landed in 7.6, it looks like.
You mean the command line interface?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
I, for one, think that it makes sense to add the new command line debugger, but at the same time, the challenge that we may run into here is that the inspect on 6 is quite a bit further behind than the inspect on 7 and 8. So we may want to actually not backport this, since there is a command line debugger that works, and we have no guarantee that node inspect is going to continue working.
Right. And I guess we don't have a way to start to run the unit tests or anything either, so.
And no one's really asked for it. So,
Yep.
Okay.
We'll
So
end up using that too. Yep.
Okay. So the next one is default ICU case mapping is a V8 option. I think James chimed in on this one already and said, oh no, we didn't. So this is one that we were looking at, which is that to local uppercase and to local lowercase do not function properly without this ICU case mapping flag to V8. It fixes a bug, but it's for ICU to uppercase on ICU 58. What version of ICU are we running? So we've got ICU 58. Actually, yeah, so this is broken. We're using ICU 58 on Node 6, and we are seeing the bug that is in this bug report. So I, for one, think that we should plan this.
Why is it considered a minor, not a bug report?
Pardon?
It looks like it's a bug fix, so why is it considered minor?
Because it was labeled as a minor. It adds an extra flag to V8, which I think adds features in V8.
Yeah.
It'd be something where if you actually use that command line option, right?
Oh, actually, here's a fun one. I just built it with that thing. Error, unrecognized flag, ICU case mapping. I don't think the version of V8 that we're shipping even has that flag, so I think we can skip it.
Okay.
So I think that likely I'll put a note in here to Stephen. We'll probably actually have to update something or float something on V8 if we want to see this land. So I think
So the general thing is we would like to land it if it makes sense, but we're not gonna, like, we'll have to see if Stephen is willing to work out if it should.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think he can give us the best insight in like how important it is.
Yep.
Maybe a better description of its impact and.
Yeah.
Okay. So Miles, are you noting these as we go along?
Yep. I'm going through and I've been updating that list. I've been like erasing things and moving things around. Oh, you know what I haven't been doing? I'm the worst. I've not been adding the do not land label to the 7 reminders that I just removed. I'm sorry. I'll do that now for all the future ones.
Cool. Right, so next one is the crypto. Return this in set auth tag set AAD. Sam reviewed. Any thoughts? Seems quite non-controversial at first glance.
Oh yeah, that's totally. I mean, it's just useful to clean those things. It used to return undefined, now it returns this. If that breaks somebody's code, I'd be surprised. And it increases API uniformity across the LTSs.
Makes sense to me.
Yep, me too.
Cool. Miles, Jeremiah?
Sorry, I was updating other ones. So this is the crypto.
9398, yeah.
Yep, that makes sense to me. This is the same reason for the other ones, just like let's keep the APIs consistent for like really tiny ones.
Seems
Okay, cool. So next one, 1996, implement TTL true for DNS resolve 4. One by Ben.
Everett, I'm going to run for 1 second. I'll be right back. I have to grab my charger or my computer's going to die.
Sure. Yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts on this one?
I'm looking through the original issue, 5893. Oh, I see. I think it's a problem. It's being solved.
Yeah, it looks like, well, someone requested it, right?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
can't.
people can't do DNS caching. They don't know that not well because they don't know the TTL of the DNS records. So
It also doesn't affect default behavior, right? So it seems
Yeah,
like
it's-
it ought to be safe.
they're purely additive as far as I can.
Yeah. So I can't think of any reason why not. It sounds like if people were asking for it, it would make sense.
Yep.
Oh well, actually, it adds an extra. It
Option.
adds an extra argument to the unresolved callback. I think if I'm reading it correctly.
Well, then it'd be,
That'd be Semver Major.
unless it's at the end.
It is at the end. Yeah.
Oh, TTLS. Yeah, okay.
Not in the documentation. So
Yeah.
it only happens if you specify the TTL option, in which case you would expect the callback to be different. So yeah, no, that looks okay.
Right. Yeah. Okay. That's reasonable.
Uh, I think it looks generally okay. We could ask Ben. I mean, nobody's dying for it yet. He might not get feedback by tomorrow, but we could. He's got other things on his mind, but we could flip till the next minor.
Yeah. I guess the question is, with all of these, it's like, do we see a reason not to, right? Because if the guy who raised the PR says, no, I don't think this should go back, then fair enough.
Yeah.
Personally raised the PR.
I mean, it looks pretty safe to me.
This is the DNS one.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'm for it. This was one I think Ben specifically requested it, right? Or no?
No.
Well, he requested it as a feature, and well, I mean, just a PR. But I don't know if he.
He didn't mention a backport anywhere that I can see.
Yeah, the options are optional. They don't require, like, they don't change any of the functionality. The other stuff is added at the end, which you were just mentioning. This seems like the kind of thing that, like, it's been sitting there in a release for a long time without any sort of problems. Is there any reason that anyone's come up with to not backport this?
Don't think so.
I think we should backport it, especially it's been in.
Yeah, 7 since November. No.
Yeah, it's November. It's.
It lands cleanly. I'm running the tests right now.
Okay. So should we move on? seems pretty, like if it lands easily, great. If it doesn't, ping Ben and see if he wants to backport it.
Okay.
Cool. Next one is cluster return worker reference from disconnect.
This one is
10019.
almost identical to the crypto return this. This is just returning a reference so that people can write code that can be chained. This landed in December. There's not been a single ping about any sort of problems on it since. And you know, this is one of those things where I think if we say no, we should kind of like relitigate the things that we said yes to.
Makes sense.
Do we have anyone feel differently about that? Okay, I'm throwing that up there. Sam, the next one's yours. TLS, allow obvious key passphrase combinations.
I think it's a good idea. It's low risk, and it makes the API more uniform.
Yep, sounds good to me.
I'm sorry, I have to go in like a minute and a half to.
Okay, do you want to quickly just go through? There is
there
one. Let's go through all the ones that are yours quickly. Does that work for you?
Sure.
So the TLS obvious keys. That was just that's just exporting features from OpenSSL, right?
It's not even OpenSSL. It's how we spend. There was a handful of different ways you could put keys and passwords into the PFX, or into the TLS library, and some worked and some didn't, and it just kind of depended how they were added. So I just added some extra options so that it's sensible, easy to document. You can see the doc changes. The doc changes are what we should look for. So it used to be, for example, you couldn't have a password. Under some conditions, you could have a password, and other conditions you couldn't. And now the password is us like, if you have a password, it uses a password. If you don't have a password, it doesn't use a password. It's really, I think it works now how anybody would expect it to work if you didn't read the docs and you just saw what the arguments were.
Okay. So where are people landing on this?
Seems reasonable.
Okay, and I'll throw that into the yes pile so we can figure out if that needs to be backported. So the next one of Sam's.
Actually, 8334 is not mine, but I helped get it landed. I think that's useful having.
Use CAs.
Yeah, using the system CAs. So that one's really going to help the packagers like Node and Debian packagers.
Yeah.
And then,
Yeah, there are two people currently patching there. Fedora and Alpine are currently patching it in, right? So that seems like something.
Okay, yeah. So if
they're running.
are patching it, I'm 100% behind this. Does anyone have any anyone not for it?
Landed in 7.5. It's been around for ages.
Okay. So we can.
And then the last one that's kind of mine. The test one I think is just a test. What is it, simple miner?
Well, the TLS socket supports sex CTX options.
This is the TLS support. Oh yeah. So there's two commits in there, and that's why it.
Oh, okay. That
They
makes
just
sense.
got split.
Right. I was like, why is it testing it? Yeah. So. Yeah, there are complaints about it. It adds API uniformity and just makes things work kind of the way anybody would think that they should work. So and it's been around, well, since February 20th. Is that it?
That makes sense.
Okay. And I have to split, or I will be in trouble. I'm
Right.
sorry.
See you, Sam.
Okay, cheers, y'all.
Yeah, that one seems reasonable.
Okay, cool. So we'll move those two up.
So the next one is that node no warnings environment variable.
Sorry, 1 second. Yeah, node warnings, environment variable. This is Collins. This landed in 7.5 in January, and it's a command. It's an environment variable for a flag that we have. I guess we should make sure the no warnings flag
Exists.
exists.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess this won't necessarily be needed anymore with the node ops, but
That's
So the option node no warnings works with Node. I think allowing for these command line flags, like the environment variables, for consistency across versions makes a ton of sense. Allows people to actually use it.
yeah.
no
The thing about
objection.
No
the thing about
objection.
node options is interesting, right? But I guess if we're going to talk about not using this, like that would go into master again first. So yeah, now this
Yeah,
is in 7.
Exactly. We haven't deleted it from head, so why?
Yep.
So this one, lib build node inspect into node, we can skip that because that's part of the other inspect stuff that we're not doing.
Yes.
That got just disorganized.
So you do not use pointers to standard vector as the next one?
Yes. Oh no, the next one is crypto ability to select search store at runtime.
Did you?
34.
Oh yeah, okay. Oh, we already did that, didn't we? That's use system CAs instead of bundle one.
Oh, okay, that's just another one that got
yeah, that's part of the same.
Okay, I'll throw that up with the other ones.
Cool. So the next one is build support for MIP64.
That was like a super tiny change, right?
Seems
That
like
was
a good
like,
idea.
okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
Same reason why not.
Cool. That's a strong why not from everyone. So then we got deprecate node debug. Interesting.
No, that one shouldn't be in.
Right? Yeah, it's got don't land on. Okay. I don't know how this. Yeah, anyway.
Yeah, I'll bring it down. And the last one now then would be add option to stop duplicates in history.
For read line, yes. Okay, there is a note on the issue. This patch needs to land with another patch because we renamed the API afterwards.
Okay.
So
this is the one that Ben requested to be backported, right? And James said +1.
Is it?
Yes, and I'm the one who said it needs to land with 11.950, which is the rename dedupe history option.
I would say this is very low risk.
Okay.
And it was requested for quite a while before it landed. So.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, Ben has explicitly requested for this and for the dedupe history. So I'll throw that up there. It's explicitly mentioned in there that we want it. So, okay. So I'll throw that up there. This gives us a clear list of things to be backported. It's a hearty list. It's going to be a nice release.
Yep.
There's a list of things that don't need backporting that we're not saying no to. There's 2 that were unsorted in here. Those were just a little bit too fresh, and we wanted them to bake a little bit longer, which were the add %i and %f formatting specifiers and crypto add random fill and random fill sync. Does anyone feel like any of those are like pressing to do right now, or are they cool with them baking another couple months?
Not pressing.
Yep.
Baking sounds good.
Okay, delicious. So I've got to run because I've got another meeting I need to get into. Are we good on everything for right now?
Yes. So
Sounds like
do we need to go through those and mark and label them? Or are you just going to land the ones that say yes?
I will go through this yes list. I will land all the ones that should be landed, and I will ping people on backporting what needs to be backported. And I will start to see the libuv stuff and like ping people as necessary. Now, the one thing that I do think would be good when I go through and finish this, I will clean up this issue. Gib, if you don't mind me going through. And then what I will do is any of the ones that require backports, I'll make an explicit list of the ones that landed versus the one that need backports, and we can make sure that any of the ones that need backports that are like, oh my God, we need this for the release, that we like are able to do that.
Okay.
Cool.
Sounds
I
good.
got a boogie. Thank you all. Have a good one.
Thank you. Talk to you later.
Great. So that's that. Is there anything else?
I think it's just you and me now.
Oh, okay.
So, that seems right to me. I think we can
Yep.
call it a day, and I'll stop the broadcast.
Sounds good. Cheers.
Bye.